Hello and welcome to the Nialler9 Podcast. The transition from summer to autumn is a trickier one in terms of podcasting. I was on holidays, first of all, but also you may have missed the news that was shared by us that Andrea Cleary, my eminent co-host, is going to be finishing up. Actually, on the next podcast, she is going to be spending all of her time on her PhD for the next foreseeable future. So after taking the summer off, she's decided, actually, it's too difficult for her to do the podcast as well. So we are very lucky to have had her for so long. But we'll keep the chat about Andrea till next week when it'll be her final podcast on the Nialler9 Podcast anyway. It was certainly co-hosting. Surely she'll be back and doing the listening parties as well. We did our last listening party with her last week as well. So you'll be hearing that at some point. The album that Andrea chose was Yeah, Yeah, Yeah's It's Blitz. So we'll be sharing the recording of that before sharing Andrea's final podcast, a best of the month, which will be a bit of a bumper one as well, because we'll be covering August and September, the music that was released around that time. But before we get to all that kind of final endings, I wanted to share this recording from Saturday just gone in Segotia in Rathmines. We were asked to do a live podcast for the first time in a while, so we thought we'd do it. Segotia is a community space that houses yoga classes, creative courses, art classes, exhibitions, events, and they had a one-day festival called Me Au Segotia on Saturday. It's in Rathmines, beautiful building, beautiful space, really nice people involved in it. And when they asked us to do it, we figured, well, it might be a good time then to talk about the idea of sustaining and building independent music communities in Dublin. And so we have a number of people, Andrea and myself, hosts, and as you'll hear, and then I will just mention who's on the panels as well. We had Alba Molina, who is part of Dublin Digital Radio, Dublin Modular, runs an alternative Latin night called In Par, and is also involved in Synthesize Her, which is a kind of a workshop for Flinta attendees to get their hands on synthesizers and learn and workshop all those kind of things. Then Alba is also involved in Alternating Current, which is Dublin Digital Radio's annual experimental grassroots contemporary Irish music festival. It usually happens over May every year. Then we have Oisin Klinkenberg, who is an environmental researcher and bringing that kind of nature background to his work. He also does a show on Dublin Digital Radio called Amok on Show, very much about inspired by nature. But Oisin is also a volunteer at Dublin Digital Radio and on the steering committee alongside Alba. So the two of them are joining us for this chat. So we're kind of talking across different communities in Dublin, certainly DIY ones. And then Siún Moriarty as well joins us. She is the marketing manager in the Button Factory, venue manager in Curveball, and founder of Blank Bar, which is an artist development and management agency involved with artists like Rory Sweeney and Vatican Jail. So those are three panelists for this chat. There's lots to discuss. We don't get near half as much as I'd like to discuss, but I think we had a fairly riveting chat anyway. So yeah, here is our chat about how to build and sustain independent music communities in Dublin. Hope you enjoy it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this live Nialler9 podcast panel thing. Myself and Andrea are hosting on this couch over here. We'll introduce this couch in a few minutes. I was asked to do this by Segotia, looking at the space and thinking about what it is about, the community aspect of it. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot this year as well, is specifically community in music and community spaces. And it's something like I have to be aware of and talk about all the time because for obvious reasons, a lot happens in terms of Dublin spaces and how it works and venues closing down. So in the last few years, this panel is essentially about building and sustaining independent music communities in Dublin. And what that means, well, before we get to that point and ask to introduce the panelists, we'll give you some examples of some context for what's been happening. In recent years, the corporatization of music spaces has been increasing in various ways. On a practical level, like from a fan perspective, that gigs are more expensive than they ever were. There's lots of add-ons and fees, all that kind of stuff. What we've always been good with in Dublin, I think, is, community and DIY stuff. But it's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain those communities and spaces. We've seen over the last 10 years, the likes of Jigsaw close. We've seen more recently music venues like the Workman's Cellar, Star Bar close. So it's no doubt it's a difficult market to sustain as a music operator in terms of a venue and a space. But they also obviously has a knock-on effect in terms of how it works for if you are a more niche operator, the spaces that you have access to. The Give Us the Night campaign have put out some statistics recently that says 4 in 5 nightclubs in Ireland have closed since the year 2000. So the added pressure of that, and then in terms of Irish nightlife, there's a lot of red tape around how it works. There's things like special exemption orders, which means you have to pay each night. I can't remember exactly what the fee is. It was 410. I think it might be down a bit now. But, these kind of things, you have to pay that fee per night to open up late after 11 o'clock. So, so with those things, special exemption orders, red tape, reliance on alcohol sales for venues are a big deal. But, what we want to really do is explore the alternatives in that space. But before that as well, I want to also mention, especially this year, there's been such a interest and awakening in terms of how and where we get our digital music and services from. We've seen, in the last year, we did a podcast recently where we interviewed Liz Pelly. Liz Pelly has a book called Mood Machine, which is very much about the nefarious practices that Spotify have been employing in order to fill their playlists with, fake artists or artists they have prior agreements with in order to reduce the royalty payments that they pay out, things like that. But then obviously most recently, the owner and CEO, Daniel Ek of Spotify, has been cashing out his money and investing it into military AI drone technology, which is, obviously problematic. And you're asking artists who are already upset with what they're getting back in terms of payouts from a streaming service like Spotify, then to basically allow the value of this company to build to the point where it can now be invested in some military drone technology. Last week, we saw 400 artists sign up to not stream their music in Israel as part of the No Music for Genocide campaign. So essentially creating a digital cultural boycott in a global capacity. It's not something I'd seen before, so I thought it was really interesting. But obviously, there's been such a growing awareness of how the structures in music and festivals in particular work. We've seen this year a company called Superstruct, who own a lot of European festivals, basically, and who are owned by a private investment firm called KR, who have documented ties to both weapons manufacturers and Israeli companies developing data centers and advertising real estate on illegally occupied land. So what does that mean? Means that a lot of festivals like Sonar, Sigget, which has invited Irish platforms and influencers this summer, Field Day, Boiler Room brand have been boycotted by artists who are drawing a line about these kind of things. In an Irish context, we've seen Irish artists take a stand against, say, Barclays Bank in the UK, playing at festivals like the likes of CMAT, playing at festivals like The Great Escape and Latitude, putting pressure to boycott the festivals, to get rid of sponsors like Barclays who have ties to Israel. We've also seen last year, the big one was at South by Southwest in Texas. A lot of the Irish artists protest and dropped out in response to the US military sponsorship of the festival. And it's with those kind of things that we take into account what we're going to talk about now as well. So it felt like it might be a good time to explore the alternatives of what might be possible when everything that we are involved in, every platform or service we use has its own moral and ethical implications. So, but we want to bring it back to what's happening in Dublin specifically. So Andrea and myself are here, but our guest panelists over here, well, we start with Alba, and you can tell us, first of all, what you do in music, what you're involved in, and we can go from there.
I'm Alba. I'm a producer and artist, and I've been involved with Dior and Dublin Modular and synthesizer in the past couple of years. Dior is a community radio station based on grassroots for radio, and I guess very centering community, and I guess community in the sense of learning from each other as a non-hierarchical, I guess, organization. And with Dublin Modular, it's a queer run organization as well. Last year we did a series called High Five, where we were trying to, I guess, take in some of what you were talking about, less venues, and how can we actually make venues trust that parties are also a good thing for the community. Mm-hmm. So we were we run a few parties in the RHA, Small Cali, Project Art Centre, and the complex as well. And synthesizer is a Flinta specific space for exploring music, technology, and electronic music. So that's what it is.
That's a nice overview of what you do, for sure. Oisin.
My name is Oisin Klinkenberg, and I volunteer with Dublin Digital Radio as well. And that's it really for me. I suppose it is. I think in this kind of conversations, it is important to note as well that I volunteer with Dublin Digital Radio. My background is environmental research, and I've worked in jobs like this. But Dublin Digital Radio for me has been an amazing kind of community organization that I saw a lot of values that I aligned with, and that a lot of people who aren't musicians and who aren't artists as well kind of come together and have a space, I suppose, in that artistic kind of world to kind of give their time. So I got involved with it when I was actually living abroad. So it's also a really great community for people who have left Ireland for whatever reason to keep in connection with the city. So that was with the show, and when I came back to Dublin, I then got involved with volunteering, and because of what it's trying to do, its ambitions in creating an alternative platform for musicians and artists in Dublin and maybe further afield as well. I kind of just went headfirst into it, and it's a really beautiful, beautiful place.
Great, we'll get more into that. Shu.
Hello, my name's Shu Moriarty. I have a few different hats that I wear. I guess my day-to-day job is I work in the Button Factory as the marketing manager in there, and I've been kind of part of the operational setting up of Curveball, which is the upstairs 80 to 100 cap venue that we have, which I guess, as Niall had just mentioned there, a huge reason that we wanted to revamp the space and make it something that was kind of its own kind of vibe within the venue ecosystem in Dublin was seeing other venues close and how there was a lack of kind of cultural spaces that maybe allowed things like clubs and launch parties, listening parties, birthday parties, club nights. So something that was multifunctional to be used across all different kind of mediums of art. And then I guess my also day job is I run Blank Bar, which is a music management and an artist development agency. We're working currently with Rory Sweeney and Vatican Jail. And that kind of started on the back of, I did a master's in London a few years ago, specifically looking at how streaming algorithms were affecting how independent artists were being discovered, and found that it was a very broken system. And I wanted to find ways to really tangibly help people portray their creative vision, be involved in the creative process, and find ways to kind of find those audiences both on and offline outside of the system that is very obviously broken. So
Great, lovely. Andrea, do you want to introduce, because there's another reason we're talking about music communities, because you are doing a PhD involving the whole sphere of communities.
So I am a researcher in TU Dublin in the School of Media, and my research focuses on specifically feminist music collectives across the island. And looking at how alternative spaces are being built through a gender lens, but also looking at how communities are being built through that. And I also work as research assistant on the live music mapping Dublin project, which it's actually a European-wide project, but I'm working with the Dublin team, and we are mapping every single venue in Dublin from now back until the 1930s, and working on creating this kind of map that you will be able to have like a slider on it and see the emergence and how venues are kind of dissolving over time. And hopefully from a research perspective, being able to look at, well, what is the impact? What was, for example, the impact of the 2008 financial crash? What was the impact on, a certain amount of development in one area of the city, a lack of development in another area of the city? So that's something else I'm working on as well. And so mainly I'm interested from a feminist perspective of how alternatives can be created in venue spaces, practice spaces, educational spaces as well, both formal and informal. How girls are educated differently when it comes to music to boys across the school system in Ireland, and then also in those informal spaces as well, the kind of subcultures, like, for example, the work that Synthesize Her do, I think is really, really important, because in electronic music spaces, it's very, very difficult for opportunities to arise for young women, young Flinta people to be able to get that kind of that access to even just learn how to DJ, learn how to use a synthesizer with their mates, because it's usually the boys are doing that, and it can be very, very intimidating. And that goes for rock as well, it goes for trad, it goes kind of all across the board. So that's sort of the lens that I come at it from, is kind of that gender lens.
So we're talking a lot about, social aspects of communities and how to build and sustain these kind of things. Obviously being social and having space to do that. DDR is primarily online radio station, but how does it work behind the scenes? How is it set up? Because it's been going for how long now?
Well, I suppose it's going on close to 10 years. So I hope, I think Alba can talk more to that, but we'll hopefully have things to share about what we'll be doing to celebrate 10 years of existence, which, in this community-driven, volunteer-led, nobody's earning any money from Dublin Digital Radio, but a lot of people are putting in a lot of time and effort and love. So 10 years is kind of actually a big deal. So we're going to try and celebrate that and give it the time it deserves next year. But behind the scenes, I forgot to mention that I suppose my volunteer capacity within Dublin Digital Radio is myself and Alba both sit on the steering committee. So we are essentially a company, actually. We are a company, but nobody earns any money. We legally had to register as a company for insurance reasons and all these kind of things. So we have an AGM that runs every year that if you're a member of, you become a member through signing up through Patreon. And every member has a vote in that AGM. And then we try obviously to supply or give benefits such as cheaper merch, free entry to parties and things like this. So there's the membership base, which we collect through Patreon. We have the steering committee, which does a lot of the kind of background admin and organizational work. And then we have, which is probably the most important actually, general meetings that happen every month in which volunteers and members alike can come and have a say in what happens in Dublin Digital Radio. And if we don't have enough shows, let's say, or enough kind of Flinta representation on Dublin Digital Airwaves, that is brought to a general meeting, we discuss it and we come up with a solution, maybe some arguments, maybe some healthy discussions. We might vote on what to do on whatever issue is present, or even if it isn't an issue, what do we want to create? How do we want to move forward? And it's always just often sometimes frustrating, long conversations about what to do. And it's essentially, very, very democratic, and extremely rewarding. And do you have anything to add?
That's a great overview, but I guess it's just to add that the way it runs is just by the intention of everyone that it's involved in it, and it is you can't really be too precious of what do you want, or like what other people want, or I think it's just like that's how like community works. It's like a constant learning through peer work and peer discussions. And as like Oisin was saying, it's like sometimes they're like really productive, some of the times they're more tense. But I think there's like a sense of like consensus when anyone that is involved in the station as a volunteer or as someone more in the deep of the organization, that there's like an openness for people to share. And in that way, you just learn so much about what you're bringing to the table and what's further ado for the greater sense of community, and to ensure that like you are, you know, that like the word community is being enacted, not just a word within the station.
Do you get a sense then of the kind of frustrations and things that are perhaps missing in the city as a result of having those conversations pretty regularly?
I mean, clearly there's like the lack of spaces, there's like infrastructure in so many ways. I guess radio is different. Well, no, because then we just like moved to a new space, and we're lucky that like the space that we're in, like we share like studio with Flux. It's a city council owned, so it means that like we don't have a private landlord that is going to kick us out, because a lot of work went into, I guess, fitting the space. But I guess like we have the ability to like just be in the airwaves. So I guess like radio is like more translocal in that way. And yes, we have issues with like the events and stuff, but like it's not as, I guess, impactful in terms of like if someone is just like focused on events.
But you do events as well. That's like there's a yourself involved in the alternate currents, right?
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a bit about that? Because that does actually reflect some of the mission statement stuff is about space as well, sound and space.
So Alternating Current is like a festival that it's part of DDR. The way it works, it's like a through Project Arts funding. And this year it was like alongside Aidan Brady, I was the creative producer for it. And we were exploring the theme of like urbanism and sonology, and how like, you know, you navigate the city, and how like urbanism really impacts on like how you navigate the city. So we kind of like took this like toll that like we just wanted to like go quite large, and like it worked, but like it was kind of like reivindicating the lack of spaces. We ended up having a venue, like we had 2 venues for gigs in the Pepper Canister Church and in the complex, but then we also had some interventions around Dublin. So kind of like to, I don't know, have like a bit of an impact on like people that were walking by. Like we had like a sound installation in Love Lane, and then there was like another sound walk all around Dublin 8 into Mary Street. Just to like, I guess like reivindicate also like the space outside, like, and how like the city is just made for tourists in a way. And like, you can see that like some areas are really neglected. Like you can find like a coffee shop, or you can find like amenities there. So I guess like that's what we wanted to talk about with the festival, just because we had to like end up going for like any expensive venue that was there. But we were like, how can we touch on the idea of like the context of complaining about the lack of space, but using what's there for us.
Shun, you're involved at the Button Factory as well as Curveball. So Button Factory is it's an independent venue in Dublin.
It is indeed.
Which is a rarity now, because a lot of the times the way that the promoters work is they kind of silo off their different venues, so they only get to use them. And then if you want to use them, you have to work with them, kind of thing. Makes it very difficult in terms of, especially when there's lack of space. So can you talk a little bit about like what are the challenges now for you in terms of running an independent venue or making that sustain itself?
Yeah, good question. I guess with what you're touching on there about kind of other venues being linked to wider promoters, I think that I've seen since we've kind of launched the Curveball thing, a real want for both artists and promoters and smaller clubs to explore a different space that isn't aligned with those values, I guess, at the heart of kind of what's going on with some of the other spaces. and looking for something that's like a central space, I guess, where they can, you know, we just provide the room and we provide as much as we can from our kind of offices side in terms of supporting them to do those events. And I guess that's not really something that you might see in many other spaces where you just pay your venue hire fee, you get connected with your engineer and then off with you. Whereas we try and kind of add a little bit more in terms of facilitating the event, making sure that things are right, doing site visits, making sure the room is laid out in the way that they want, rowing in and out as much as they feel they want the help with. And I think I've been working in live events for nearly 5 years now. So I have a really strong understanding of being able to support people who might be doing like their first club night or it might be their second gig. And I think it's so easy to like, you might have like a baby band from BIM being like, this is our first show. And you're like, I think maybe other venues might be like, oh, I don't want to do that because like, what if no one comes and what if no one spends money at the bar? And of course, those thoughts go through your head. But at the same time, I want to make sure that people feel this is a space that they can come in and maybe there's less boundaries to access there. So it's something we've been really looking at now. And I guess now that we have this kind of funny in between period, we just launched it in July. So we're like really focusing on the programming at the moment and making sure that it's really diverse and we're including lots of different things. Like we've got Mo Cultivation doing their club nights in there now. We have Fashion Week doing their rap party. But then we had like Rune doing their, you know, Dublin show there with their album released there a few weeks ago. Like I said, many bands coming in from BIM and otherwise, you know, there's a real kind of like punk ethos, I feel, with the youngsters at the moment that like, even though I'm only 29, I feel like it's making me feel a little bit old. We had Jet to Ricky doing his show and I was like, I don't know who these kids are, but right on, you know. But so yeah, we're just trying to make it a real open space where everyone can kind of come in and do their thing. And I think I was like up down in Mike the Pies and talking to Aidan down there just before we launched. And like he stands at the door and shakes everyone's hand when they come in and out and he knows all the heads, you know, because they're obviously such an active venue down there. And I was like, how can I do that without being there every night of the week when I have so many other things to do as well? But I think having that personal touch and someone who's empathetic to the situation that's kind of happening in Dublin at the moment, it seems like it's having a good benefit anyway with the stuff that's being programmed.
I think that sort of sense of like community is a word that is used a lot. And I think especially I think I would argue that community is now quite cool and marketable as an idea, right? And I think even the idea of collectives have become quite cool and marketable as an idea. And I think what you were both saying about enacting community and making sure that you're there to look after the younger people who are coming up, whose first gigs it might be, or being a friendly face if you decide to send the email to say, hi, Didi, or I'd quite like to volunteer. And those things are not always easy for a lot of people. I think, you know, for myself, I know like looking back in my 20s and thinking, you know, I would have seen a lot of cool initiatives around, but I might have been a bit too shy to put myself forward. I might have been just a little bit, well, these people are like very cool. But I think having that sense of community and having that sense of we are all mucking in here and we are all involved in this is something that I've seen in my own research across a lot of the collectives that I've been speaking to. And it really, really is so important to make space for new people to come in, whether they're new bands or whether they're new volunteers. And yeah, so you've spoken a little bit about that, but in DDR, you know, Oisin, I'm wondering about like the decision that you took to kind of get involved with DDR as a volunteer. Like I'm sure there might be people here today who are thinking, this sounds cool, or, you know, I'd like to get involved. What was that like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're kind of saying that like there are places, and especially when you're maybe a little bit younger, you look at these organizations, collectives, party organizers or whatever, and you do, I relate. I thought DDR was way too cool for me, you know, when I was younger, and I thought I would never have a show on Dublin Digital Radio because I saw it as like a really amazing, cool thing even before being involved, you know. And then I got a show accepted, and I thought, wow, cool, I'm cool too. And essentially, Dublin Digital Radio is very cool, but at the end of it, also you are too. And absolutely, everybody is, right? So that's like, you know, to break down those barriers. How do we break down those barriers? I suppose these conversations have gone on relatively recently. I think in Dublin Digital Radio is like, how do we sustain ourselves?
Yeah,
continue to do that, and that is how do we bring in new, eager, and younger people? Because yeah, I'm not too much older than you, but I am older than I used to be, and things are going to be taking over my life potentially soon enough with how life goes on. So yeah, we're looking at how to engage with younger people, and how are we doing that? I suppose currently, I think Flux and our positioning in Flux Studios, which is an amazing place in Dublin. If you haven't been or if you haven't heard about it yet, do go visit. It's always free to go in. There's exhibitions on.
It's in the middle of town.
Yeah,
you can do your shopping on Grafton Street and pop into Flux. So yeah, I suppose our visibility there is one thing that has really allowed us to talk with them face to face with people who think what we're doing is really cool and they want to get involved. And having those in-person conversations, I think, has been a really amazing thing for us, because we were in the complex, and before that we were in Jigsaw. But the complex days, I suppose, we were in a windowless studio, and we were just kind of nearly, I suppose, now with our somewhat of a new life, we were maybe surviving as a collective and as an organization. But now I think with the visibility and people being able to talk face to face with young people and old people as well, older than me, coming in and saying, how do I get involved, has been, I think, a lifeline that will help us sustain ourselves and recruit people to volunteer with us going forward.
Yeah.
Does the studio operate more kind of as a third space now? Would people go and hang out there a bit more? Is that kind of vibe?
Yeah, that's the ambition, I think. And that's definitely the ambition. But yeah, it's something that we don't know how to navigate yet, I suppose. Alternating Current, I think, gave a little bit of life to that idea of having it as a third space. And you like Flux, I can't underestimate or can't over say how amazing they are and what they want their space to be, because at the end of the day, we have a studio in this wider Flux studio and they want people in the door hanging out. So yeah, we're trying to work out how that is going to be like. And again, it's about that transparency and that communication of what Flux is, what Dublin Digital Radio is, and how we communicate that people are welcome. So I suppose we're trying to work on that better, I suppose, at the moment. So third space, we'd like to think it is. Yeah.
Great. Siún, you mentioned Death to Ricky there, one of these cool, very young Irish hip hop underground artists. There's a night called Catacombs is happening as well, and that I was talking to somebody about this week, and we were saying it's like one of the first examples in a long time where there's a genuine like music scene developing in a city in Dublin, and I don't think I've seen that for a while. Have you had any experience of it? Are you aware of other communities developing? Because I think the idea is that because everything operates digitally now, the idea of subcultures and communities don't really happen as much, and we're seeing that though again. So, have you any insights into why that might be happening, or how is it happening?
I guess specifically, I have two thoughts on that. With the Death to Ricky thing, obviously the internet has been a very positive force for that genre, and it's a lot of young people. Like the Catacombs gigs are 16s plus, I think, maybe even 14s plus. So it's a young, really, really passionate audience. And again, that lends itself very well to like community. There's a style of dress there. There's a whole kind of persona developing around that kind of scene, which is really cool. Again, I feel very like what's going on here, but I love Ricky and I love what he's doing. And I think it's really cool that there's this kind of whole genre kind of building around him. But again, like if you think about the parameters around venues, 16s don't do very well at the bar. And I feel like, fair play to the Soundhouse for housing Catacombs, and it's doing really well. Like they had Sign Crush's Motorist at one of the shows, and there's a real kind of whole scene growing around there, which is really cool. So I think all that kind of area of kind of music, and again, Sign Crush's Motorist or Death to Ricky or any of those kind of crew, it's breeding from online culture, and that's really cool as well. And a lot of, Discord and platforms like that have a big part to play.
Well, it's heartening as well because, I guess after COVID, there was a bit of a reset in terms of culture, gig culture, club culture. A lot of people were suddenly going to things that they hadn't before. A lot of people had stopped going to things as well. I feel that's certainly my experience of it anyway. But you do feel like, now there's these new, younger subcultures who are coming out, communities who are developing, and I think that's really, really positive. And it's great to see because it's not shown, but like you say, it starts online, but it doesn't stay there. And I think that's the key thing is like, it's nice to do that. And I think the club culture in particular changed big time in terms of from COVID onwards. Do you have any thoughts on the navigation of that period and how bringing people in, and as somebody who DJs and works in club music as well sometimes, like what has changed?
Yeah,
what has changed?
Sure
What has changed in club culture? Like for example, Tengu is a good example in how it has these things in place to encourage nighttime monitors, things like people who are there in the venue to ensure that there's a safety element, discouraging the use of phones on dance floors, things like this. These are things which allow us to be more present, allow us to feel safe in these spaces, and therefore are only a good thing. And are you seeing more of that?
Yes, and I'm seeing as well, like kind of like a push for like, sober parties and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is appreciated. But I think at the same time, there's also like, when you want to put a night out on or anything, there's a lot of like push for the venues, like how many people do you think you're going to bring in?
Yeah.
Because there's a focus on like the consumption at the bar is what's going to make them money.
Mm.
So I think it's just, I mean, after COVID, like the spaces have been so limited. There's, I think, Tango, Wigwam, but there's also have been like also a resurgence of like other venues rejigging what they do in terms of like opening it more to like club nights. But there's like, I guess, a strain in terms of like everything has gone up, and like to run a night, it's not as easy as it was, or even to like put on a gig, it's just like it's already like 300, 500 euro. Like,
definitely.
Just for the venue.
The rental has gone up across the board.
It's gone up so much. Yeah. So I think that's what I think I've like experienced of like, as someone that has played before, and like would play or see friends play and like run gigs that like were not just like maybe club nights, you would like, I don't know, a Friday or a Saturday, even a Thursday, you just jump from one venue to another.
Yeah.
There were like way more like free gigs and like you just see way more. Now it's just like, it's even a struggle to like be able to pay like for a ticket to venues. But like at the same time, it's like all this exciting thing of like a focus on like the artist, a focus on like a safe dance floor, which is like also very important.
Yeah. That's connects to something that I've been kind of finding in my research, particularly around electronic music, is the and I'm not an absolute doomer when it comes to kind of social media and online spaces in music. I'm like, 50-50, half very hopeful about the idea and the other half is a doomer. But I do think that a lot of my research participants have kind of reported to me that if you are a DJ or electronic artist in particular, that you will often be booked based on things like the amount of Instagram followers that you have, because you can promote your gig to all of your followers and then your followers might come and so on. And obviously looking at that through a gendered lens, which I'll always like inject into any conversation that I'm having about music spaces, but looking at that through a gendered lens is, that performativity aspect when it comes to Flinta DJs and the need to perform on social media and the need to conform to what social media algorithms will push and so on. And so I think that is very, very damaging, of course, in terms of giving people who may not look like the most, social media idealistic look of what a female DJ looks like, right? And you can close your eyes and imagine, it's the pink glittery headphones and that image that does well. It's very, very damaging to kind of keep promoting that idea, but it is also really, really damaging in terms of people just aren't able to get their foot in the door as well. And it means that there's fewer and fewer alternative sounds coming through. And if they are, it's going to be in those DIY spaces, which are so important, but it's very, very hard to make a living as a DJ if that's all there is. So I think, when we're talking about creating alternative spaces, we have to think about what they are an alternative to. And it's not just, a lot of promoters one promoter owning a lot of venues and booking the same type of artists. It's also, like you were saying earlier, these digital platforms that we become increasingly kind of relying on just to get booked for a DJ set or a gig or, whatever it might be. But that's something that I'm kind of finding in my research as well.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like digital stuff, I mean, have you guys organized in DDR in that way? What have you found that's good and what have you avoided?
So how we organize ourselves digitally, documents.
Do you have a TikTok?
No, like I mean, like in a community aspect, like so myself and Andrea are in the Nialler9 Discord, which is like a private server for like people who support us, and it's a really lovely space to be because it's like
it's private, but you're welcome to join.
Yeah,
anyone who
I mean,
wants
you have to join, you have to pay for it essentially. But we did that because the reason we did it was because I felt that it had a free for all. Then it would just be that could be anyone, but we wanted to. It's the kind of things like people have shared values and things that they want to talk about with other people, and if you can find your tribe that way, and we've been doing that for 4 years now, and it's great.
Yeah, it's amazing.
We've
got a telly channel where we just talk about the traitors basically and Taskmaster when that's on. Like it's not just music, but also what's been really, really lovely and it's like the most heartening thing for me is I think it's called like gigs and live shows, and if someone's going along to a gig on their own, they'll just throw in there, is anyone going to such and such tonight? And then like friendships and, all sorts of kind of sprung up out of that. And there's a real community that is being kind of like brought offline from that space,
so
which
it's
is
really
gorgeous.
important to see that because, I think a lot of us end up just shouting shouting into the void, scrolling into the void, whatever. And then you have to remind yourself that there's real people out there who are really nice so you can chat to and meet for the first time.
And I think the point of it being real people is so important there as well. Like we're so on this whole thing about like statistics, like followers and engagement on posts and stuff. It's all just so meaningless. And it's really sad that art is being hung around these weird things where it's like, there's all these stats coming out about how many bots are on various platforms now. And when I say the word bot, I feel like a tinfoil hat, but like they're out there. Yeah. So it's so great what you guys have created there and that it's real people engaging in conversation with each other. And, it's creating that community space online that's real and tangible and goes into the real world as well.
And I think that the idea of space being something that is both digital and kind of in our real lives is really important. But of course that those spaces are, as we all know, diminishing. And something really interesting that we've kind of found with the mapping project is that the number of venues in Dublin has not kind of gone down as significantly as you would think. It's just that the type of venue, a lot of venues are like changing the type of venue that they are. So something might have been a venue before, but is now a bar that has a DJ, right? Which is a very different thing in terms of what they're willing to take a risk on and what kind of music they will even, ask a DJ to play and so on. And a lot of places where people might have been getting their start as like rock bands before are now, the bars you walk past and there's a guy and more power to him, good for him, but he's belting out the Ed Sheeran and he's belting out the Galway Girl and all that kind of stuff. And we have a lot of trouble actually, and we have a lot of debates about whether or not we're kind of counting, I suppose, these like touristified spaces as music venues. And I think even that as a conversation is interesting, is when we're talking about alternative spaces, that it is real life places where people share values and are able to come together and kind of talk to one another about it and set up something like Dublin Digital Radio or set up something like Synthesize Her. And it is so important to have that like real life space, which is something that I love that you're doing with Synthesize Her, with the means of production tour that you're doing is that you're looking at community centres, which I just think are like the unsung heroes of like space in this country. And I feel like we don't use them enough. I went last week to the St. Andrew's Community Centre. If you want, like maybe talk a little bit about the decision-making process around choosing a venue, why a community centre and not a music venue, for example.
Yeah, I guess like the idea of like the project is like not just like bringing awareness to the library that we're like touring with, but it's also for like people to see that they can just like organize themselves in a space that it's affordable.
Yeah.
So like we are being conscious of like where do we organize like our meetups, and I guess like that's another way to organize yourself, because you could just like ask people to join a Discord and to be aware of like what we're doing through online platforms. But like as she was saying, like the giving a personality, giving like a personal touch to something and organizing those meetups, you already create a sense of like connection with the people that like attend, and also like a relationship with, I guess, other facilitators. So yeah, I guess the choice for like the venue, it's important because the aim is not for us to like, you know, have a recurrent gig or meet up there, but it's like for the people that come, and that's the aim of the project, to be able to self-organize and to, you know, be aware of like there are spaces that like if you ask, you're going to say yes, and like you're going to be able to use the space. And I guess it's like giving that agency to people, and like by giving that knowledge, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's something so important when you're talking about community, and it's something that I've had to learn, which is people like you do have to ask. You do have to kind of put yourself out there and say to someone, hey, I've got an idea. Would you like to work on it with me? And they might say no, and you might feel a bit rejected, or you might want to ask a music shop, like, would you have a couple of spare instruments for, you know, this project that I'm doing to get these girls into this band or something? And you have to kind of put yourself out there and ask people. And that's the difficult part, I think, about community. That's the thing that is, I think, increasingly scary to us, because it's very, very easy to just send an email or an Instagram DM, and there's not maybe as much fear that goes into that. But when you're putting yourself out there and trying to actively build community, I feel like that's something that we've become maybe a little bit scared of, a little bit. I don't know the temperature. Yeah, I seen nodding heads. It's not just me, but people say yes to stuff and they get really excited about stuff. And like, that's something I've learned in my research. I was like very, very nervous reaching out to people and saying, you know, do you want to be involved in my research? And, sorry, it's like really boring. And they're like, no, this is great. Oh my God, this is like, let's go, let's do this. And I think that's, it's just important to remember that people do want to talk to you and they do want to work on fun stuff with you, especially around music, you know, and that's what we've seen in the Discord, and that's what we've seen.
Yeah, you just need a space in which to have break the ice almost. So those community centres and what you're doing with Synthesizer makes sense in that way. You can have that space. And
I do think it's important for that space to not always be the pub and the nightclub. I do think it's important that people meet up during the day. And, you know, I was about to say get a coffee, but like, what if we all just like started going to the library with our friends? Like, what if we all just like started hanging out at the library during the day and just getting that sense of connection that doesn't have this third activity that you're supposed to be doing, which is, you know, getting completely wrecked and then waking up the next day and thinking that all your great plans.
Well, it's like, I'm sure you guys have had a lovely day here today. There's loads of amazing things happening, loads of interesting things happening.
Yeah.
So that's part of it.
But I do think that's important, that your great plans for setting up your collective or your space isn't, you don't wake up the next day embarrassed by it and think, oh God, that was just drunk talk, you know, like I do think it's important to meet up during the day.
Sure, for sure.
And talking about like people setting up things, I notice it so much on the venue side and even on the blank bar side of things. Like if people want to do something because things are so expensive to run, the immediate thought for so many people now is, will we get a drink sponsor? Will the drink on the door make a difference?
Yeah.
Will they put some money towards the artist being there? So it's like increasingly harder to find access to financing for these things without going down that avenue, which is difficult as well.
Yeah. And I think that like kind of brings us back around to the neoliberalization of a lot of spaces, of even the act of listening to music on Spotify, of going to a festival, the increasing kind of corporate presence within community spaces, and also the fact that the term community will be used in these contexts, I think, is particularly insidious.
Big promoters talking about massive 500 plus gigs as intimate,
you know, and community driven, and
but you know,
that sort of thing.
We need spaces for niche things to happen, because that's where the really good ideas happen.
Yeah.
Siún, I want to ask you about, you're working with Rory Sweeney on his upcoming album, and he put up on Instagram last week that he's not going to put the album up on Spotify. Did you have conversations in advance of that, or what are the practical implications as somebody who has to promote the work?
Yeah, we had spoken about it at length for a very long time. And like I was saying before, when I was doing that research on Spotify, when I actually first established Blankbar as a thing, I was actually very vocally anti-Spotify. And as is the way with these things, as I kind of got my foot in the door with the industry a bit more, you do feel the pressure of being like, maybe I shouldn't be as vocal about this. Maybe I'm causing a roadster, because that was just the place where, you know, you could track all these statistics where like amount of streams mattered. It was all stuff you could give back to promoters, to agents, to bookers. So, but yeah, me and Rory put it to me about wanting to do it. And I'm always very encouraging that it's a very artist first model of way of doing things always. So whatever they want to do, I just help facilitate that. I would never really get in the way, especially not something that I align with morally like that. So we had spoken about it at length, and it's been a really interesting thing for me to think about from a management perspective. What does managing an artist, I'm hoping to get their reach out as far as possible, look like without Spotify being involved? And that's definitely been interesting, but it's something that I really am excited to dig into more, because I would love to facilitate that much, much more. So we had spoken about it, but Rory also pulled the trigger on announcing it without telling me.
Yay.
And I texted him and I was like, oh, so we're announcing right on. And he was like, yeah, fuck it. And I'm like, you know, so fair.
Yeah.
But it's been really cool. So we're looking at some other alternative platforms at the moment and partnering up with them for the release. And obviously we have a vinyl with this release as well. Old Earth, pre-order now. Plug it while I'm here.
Absolutely.
I have to do it. So that's been really exciting as well to go down the physical distribution route. It's my first physical distribution with Blankbar. So it's been a really exciting process. We're doing it with Anthem Vinyl out in Clane. And it's so cool to have a plant operating in Ireland again. And we went out to do the test press approval the last day. And it's like, this is such a gorgeous experience that, you know, it's great to have access to now. We got to go around the plant. We listened to the test press together, and it was really emotional and cool. So I guess having those steps, you know, doing the physical thing was something that we had considered in taking stuff off Spotify. But no, I'm really proud of him. And I think for me, it's just going to open the world to a whole new avenue of possibilities of, okay, how are we going to get people to listen to the music? And even the second single, Row, has just come out. And it's actually really nice to not have to be looking at Spotify for artists, looking at how many people have streamed it live over the last, you know, there's Peace, and it's being played on loads of radio stations. It's Oscuelga, so Radio na Gaeltacht to Revo Radio, like it's getting great kind of radio coverage there. So it's been exciting. Yeah, it's going to open up a lot of possibilities, and it's a weight off my shoulders to step away from the institution that is, you know, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Even like not as a artist manager or anything like that, even just as like a listener of music, I often feel when I'm listening to something on Spotify and I can see the numbers beside each of the tracks, I feel like this is none of my business. Do you know, it's a really strange feeling to have that kind of quantification of success, like so blatantly presented to the listener as though it's, you know, you're sort of correct, or it will steer you towards listening to this particular song by this artist over maybe some other songs. And this is the song that everybody's listening to and not this one. And I don't know, maybe I'm just ancient now, but I'm like, the charts were good. I think the charts, that was a good thing when you check it on like the Friday on the teletext and stuff. Bring back teletext. Bring that back. But it's sort of, you know, it's free teletext. But I think that was as much as I needed to know. Do you know? I don't need to know when I'm looking at, especially if it's an Irish artist or somebody kind of, you know, independent, a little bit smaller, and I'm looking at the number of streams beside it. I'm like, this is none of my business. I should know this. I don't need to know that. You know?
Well, that's the gamification of music, you know, and like now that artists who work with promoters now, a lot of them will be like, put me on your Spotify for artists so I can see all your data.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess it makes sense in a one way, because you're like, well, now I can see where your people are listening to your music, but it's also like, it's the only thing that people are paying attention to now, you know, and it's a bit scary.
Even for us on the podcast, like you get like we get like our stats at the end of the year, like the Spotify rap thing.
Yeah, well, it's the gamification of it all, isn't it?
And
Yeah,
like
it
you'd
just
send
makes
them
sense.
to me and I'd be like, no, I don't want that. I don't want to know.
I try, don't listen to it on Spotify.
Yeah, exactly.
Ideally.
Yeah.
Don't listen to this on Spotify.
Yeah.
So the other thing I was thinking about there was just about, I've been having loads of conversations actually about, like I was saying, the start of this panel is about people not using Spotify, people wanting to use other alternatives in terms of, are you guys aware of any kind of independent versions? Obviously, like everything has something with it. Like Bandcamp was great.
You've been using one recently.
I use a French one, I think, called Cobuzz that I really like because it has editorial and magazine stuff on it, and I really value that stuff. Again, it's like it's a form of like, it's just a form of communication that I really appreciate. You know, it's people actually writing about the music rather than an algorithm, and I think that's when Spotify is obviously algorithm driven a lot of the time. There's very little editorial on it these days.
Yeah.
So, you know, for somebody like me, I just love that stuff.
And if it is just music you're looking to listen to and not buy, I would recommend listening to your community radio stations.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
And just Dublin Digital Radio, but like there's just so many as well that like you can have us on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays, and there's others for the weekend.
Shout out if you're there. Aish is a good one, right?
Aish is a new one down in Cork who's copying our model. No, they're not. They are our what would you say? Just friends. Our son.
Oh.
Well, that's good. That shows you that it is sustainable and it is something that you can keep going.
I mean, I guess like to note on what you're saying and like what you were mentioning of like how do we organize? I think it's just like transparency and like being so transparent. Like we are like EDR is also part of like this European network called Independent Community Radio Network, and it's like an organization that like pairs up like different community radios around Europe. And like the way it started is by people being like talking to each other and be like, I have issues with audience and I have issues with infrastructure and I have issues with this. And just through that communication, like people are willing to help and share constantly. So yeah, I guess like that's like the way of organizing that we were talking about too earlier. But I guess I think Bandcamp is amazing because, you can like listen to albums and it will come a reminder to be like, hey, you've listened to this for a long time. Why don't you just buy it?
Yeah.
And then like you also have like reminders of like when people are like releasing music. And since I've been like just listening to music through Bandcamp, I invest in like people's like music, and like,
well, it's front and center and that's it. And it's like, I guess for older people in the audience or listening to this, they might be like, well, of course I would just buy the music because I'm used to that. But if you're a younger person and you're not used to buying music, you'd be like
music costs money. What?
Like if you're on a streaming service, you're not often prompted to actually buy the work. And actually that's the one I'm using, Cobuzz, is like that as well. You can buy high quality audio stuff and all that stuff. So it's really good. But yeah, Bandcamp, I think like probably paying €1 for a song is probably like 20,000. No, what is it? Can't do maths. 20,000 streams at least. You know what I mean? Like for one single song, it's a lot more probably.
Yeah.
And it depends on how it works. But yeah, it's worth reminding people that. I think people are aware of that. That's what's happening. You know what I mean? So
I found an iPod in my drawer and I ordered the little cable for it to see does it still work. And I have quite a big collection of like LPs, and a friend of mine gave me an LP to MP3, like one of those things. And I'm like, oh, this is me now. I'm in. That's my winter project, and I'm gonna go back to the MP3 life. I think. Okay. I think we're just about to wrap up, aren't we? I'd love to ask all of you, for the people in the room who have maybe been, toying with an idea in their head or have seen a little niche that they feel that they want to maybe start up something community based. What sort of advice would you, or indeed if they wanted to kind of get involved with something, what kind of advice would you give them?
I guess it's like the idea of like not being too precious, and I think open to ideas. ask, and just the consideration of like enacting community, I guess. Yeah.
Volunteer.
Yeah, volunteer.
Volunteer.
Yeah.
Listen to the radio.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of like, starting anything that you're thinking about yourselves, it would be to engage with the communities and events that are already happening that might be similar or the same or different to what you want to do. Because that's where you'll, like, for instance, like I for my radio show, I want to extend that as from a radio show to throwing gigs. It's nature focused. So trying to bridge the gap between like nature and being outside with music, and knowing that, you know, Curveball, that's a place I've been wanting to go to kind of just scope it out myself. Is this a place that I could fill with nobody knowing who the hell I am? And I've only ever put on one gig before. I need a small venue that is welcoming of new people. So like, you know, I was always going to go to Curveball to check it out, and it's really cool to hear that sort of stuff. But so it's going to just get out and engage yourself with other things and not just your thing.
That's really good advice.
Yeah. Not to be like, just do it, because it's so much more difficult than that. But, you know, it's worth kind of just taking the risk. And I think we're so scared these days, as we've touched on here, of failing at something. But like, if it doesn't go well, that's okay. And maybe you need to like as you're saying, like with the meetings, like take stock and see what went well and what didn't. And it's okay to try something and there be 5 people there. That's happened to me loads of times. And then there's lots of times that it hasn't. And that's all part of it. And maybe like a team in a community can be 2 people, and maybe you start with that. Like, I think it's always good to have someone else. It's so easy to get caught up in your own brain. So even if it's like sharing the idea with a friend and just getting their thoughts on it and brainstorming a small bit, you know, like bring it to your community that exists first, and then get the encouragement maybe to take it on, and you're going to find someone who will be interested in it as well. And yeah, just take the step.
It's great. Brilliant advice.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say don't get too disheartened if something doesn't work out at first. You have to try these things a lot. I think the best things come from continuing to just trying to do the thing. So yeah. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for listening. Thanks, Andrea. Would you like to say anything?
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks to Segotia for having us here specifically.
Thank you, Segotia, for having us.
And thank you, Alba, for stepping in last minute. Sorry, I actually didn't mention Nisha was supposed to be here from Daylight and Cat 2 and stuff to talk, but thank you for the very last minute saying yes to that.
Yeah.
So appreciate that.
And thank all of you for coming, because I know there's saunas out there, like there's like stuff going on, so we really do.
You can't spend all day in the sauna. That would be a problem.
Okay, well.
Yeah, it's the in and out that is good about it.
Oh yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, great. Well, okay. Well, get yourselves back outside.
Yeah,
and,
down to the personal training session.
Yeah.
Stick around.
Thanks
so much,
everyone.
Thanks so much to our panelists.